Chapter 1. I Married Without Love. The wedding lights were too bright. They burned against my eyes, as if they were trying to force happiness into them. As if the glow itself could stitch a smile onto my face. Gold chandeliers trembled, slightly above the banquet hall, scattering warm reflections across polished, marble floors. The music was loud. Louder, louder. My name echoed from distant tables like it belonged to someone else. I sat on the decorated stage beside a man who was now my husband. Husband. The word felt heavy. Foreign. Like a coat tailored for someone with broader shoulders, someone braver. Armin adjusted his sherwani cuff and leaned closer. "You look tired," he said softly, almost politely. "I'm fine," I replied, though my voice came out thin. He nodded once. We had perfected this performance over the past 3 months. Two strangers learning to speak in safe, careful sentences. Our marriage had been arranged quickly after my father's health began to fail. The doctors called it stress. My mother called it destiny. "Betta, we don't have time to wait for love," she had whispered to me one night in the hospital corridor. "Your father wants to see you settled." Settled. Like dust. Like something that had already given up on being carried by the wind. The guests lined up to congratulate us. Smiles. Handshakes. Camera flashes. I repeated the same words again and again. "Thank you. Please eat. Yes, we're happy. Yes, we're blessed. Blessed." If blessings felt like a slow suffocation behind the ribs, then maybe they were right. Armin's hand brushed against mine, as someone insisted we pose closer for a photograph. His touch was gentle. Hesitant. It did not spark anything inside me. No electricity. No warmth. Just the awareness of skin meeting skin. And in that single second, another hand flashed across my memory. Sad's hand. Warm. Firm. Certain. I swallowed hard. Don't think about him. But the mind is cruel. It returns to the places we forbid it from visiting. 2 years earlier, Sad and I had stood under a dying gulmohar tree, near the university gate. The red petals had fallen around us, like wounded confessions. He had held my face in his hands and said, "Wait for me. Just 1 year, I'll convince my family." I had believed him. I had believed love was strong enough to break walls built by tradition. But walls in our world were not made of bricks. They were made of fear. Reputation. Obligation. When my parents found out, everything collapsed. My father's blood pressure spiked. My mother cried until her eyes swelled. "Do you want to kill him?" She had asked me. Sad tried. He really did. But his family refused. They wanted someone wealthier. More suitable. Someone who would bring business, connections, not poetry. And then silence swallowed us. He stopped calling. I stopped waiting. Or at least, I pretended to. The wedding photographer cleared his throat. "Madam. Look at sir with affection. At affection." I turned my face toward Armin. His eyes were kind. That was the worst part. If he had been cruel, distant, arrogant, perhaps it would have been easier to justify my emptiness. Instead, He looked at me, as though he wanted to understand something he didn't dare ask. "You don't have to force a smile," he murmured when the photographer stepped away. "I know," I whispered, "but I forced one anyway." "Because that's what you do when you marry without love. You learn to act." Later that night, after the last guest left, and the music faded into exhausted silence, I stood alone in the bridal room. The heavy dupatta slipped slightly from my head. My neck ached from jewelry that felt like golden chains. The mirror reflected a bride. Red lehenga, perfect makeup. Dark kohl-framing eyes that looked lost. I lifted my hand and touched the glass. "Is this who you are now?" I asked my reflection. A wife. A daughter who did the right thing. A woman who buried her own heart to keep her family breathing peacefully. There was a soft knock on the door. "Armin." "Can I come in?" "Wes." He entered slowly, as if stepping into sacred territory. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "This must be overwhelming," he said finally. I let out a small laugh that didn't reach my chest. "That's one word for it." He hesitated, then said, "I know this wasn't your choice." "Not fully." My eyes flicked up to meet his. "You know, I'm not blind," he replied quietly. "You don't look at me the way brides look at their grooms." The honesty in his voice startled me. I said before I could stop myself. "For what?" "For not being what you deserve." A shadow passed over his face, but he shook his head. "This isn't about deserving. Our parents wanted this." I agreed. "You agreed. That's how it works. Is it?" I wanted to ask him if he had ever loved someone else, if he too had buried a name deep inside his chest, but I was afraid of the answer. "Let's take this slowly," he added. "No pressure. We'll figure it out." Figure it out. As if love were a math problem waiting to be solved. That night, when the house finally slept, I lay stiffly on one side of the bed, my back facing him. The room was dim, the air heavy with unfamiliarity. I could hear his breathing behind me. Steady. Calm. Mine was uneven. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine a future where this didn't hurt. Where waking up beside Armin felt natural. Where his presence filled the space, instead of reminding me of someone else's absence. But every time I drifted towards sleep, Sad's voice echoed in the darkness. "Wait for me." A tear slipped quietly into my hair. I wondered if somewhere, in another house across the city, he was awake too. Or if he had already moved on. Perhaps he was laughing with someone new. Perhaps he had forgotten the girl under the Gulmohar tree. The thought felt like a blade twisting slowly. Morning arrived too quickly. The sun filtered through cream curtains, exposing reality without mercy. I was no longer someone's daughter, living in her childhood room. I was someone's wife. Armin was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone. He glanced at me when I stirred. "Good morning," he said. I almost expected him to sound different. Colder. Claiming. but he was just normal. "Good morning," I replied. We moved around each other carefully, like fragile glass figurines, placed too close on a shelf. I folded my wedding clothes into a suitcase. He stepped out to take a call. Our lives had intertwined legally, socially. But emotionally, there was a wide ocean between us. When I stepped into the kitchen later, his mother smiled warmly. "Betta, how was your first night?" I felt heat crawl up my neck. "It was fine," I said softly. She seemed satisfied with that answer. Everything about this house was orderly, structured, predictable. I, on the other hand, felt like a misplaced object. Beautiful perhaps, but not belonging. That afternoon, while unpacking, I found my old diary hidden between clothes. I had forgotten to remove it. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were fragments of another life. Doodles of Sad's name. Half-written letters. Dreams about small apartments filled with books and cheap furniture. Promises we had whispered like prayers. I pressed the diary against my chest and sat on the floor. I chose this. I reminded myself. But choice and freedom are not always the same. A message notification lit up my phone. My heart stopped. For one impossible second, I thought it might be him. It wasn't. Just a cousin sending wedding photos. I stared at my own smiling face on the screen. Armin stood beside me, dignified and composed. We looked like a perfect couple. No one could see the fracture running through the center of that image. That evening, Armin came home from work carrying a small box. "For you," he said. I frowned slightly. "What is it?" "Just something." Inside was a delicate silver bracelet. Simple. Elegant. "I noticed you prefer minimal jewelry," he explained. Yesterday's set looked uncomfortable. The thoughtfulness caught me off guard. "Thank you," I whispered. He watched as I fastened it around my wrist. His gaze lingered. Not possessive, not demanding. Just observant. "Can I ask you something?" he said gently. I braced myself. "Yes." "Are you still in love with him?" The room went silent. My throat tightened. He didn't say Sad's name. He didn't have to. I could lie. I could say no. Pretend that marriage had erased history. But the truth hovered between us, fragile and sharp. "I don't know," I said finally, my voice barely audible. "I'm trying not to be." Armin nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer. "I don't want to compete with a ghost," he said. "But I also don't want to be a prison." Something inside me cracked at those words. "You're not," I said quickly. "This isn't your fault." He gave a faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We're both here because of circumstances. Maybe that's enough for now." Maybe. That night, as I lay awake again, I realized something terrifying. The absence of love was not loud. It didn't scream. It whispered. It settled into daily routines. Shared meals. Polite conversations. Small gestures of kindness. And slowly, without you noticing, it began to define your entire existence. I stared at the ceiling and wondered which would hurt more in the long run. Holding on to a love that had already slipped through my fingers, or learning to live beside a man who might one day love me more than I could ever return. Outside, a dog barked in the distance. Inside, my heart remained unbearably quiet. The days began to arrange themselves into a quiet rhythm. Morning tea. Armin leaving for work. His mother supervising the house staff. His father reading the newspaper with disciplined routine. And me, moving through corridors that still did not echo with my own belonging. I learned where the extra towels were kept, which cupboard held the good china, how his mother preferred the Dale to be tempered. I memorized these details the way one memorizes survival instructions. If I perform well enough, maybe the emptiness will shrink. Armin never pressured me. He never reached for me at night, unless I shifted closer first, which I rarely did. He slept on his side of the bed, a careful distance between us, as though respecting an invisible boundary neither of us had drawn aloud. One evening, as we sat at the dining table, his father asked casually, "So, Beta, when will we hear good news?" The spoon slipped slightly in my hand. Armin answered before I could. "Abu, it's too early." His father chuckled. "Early? These things don't wait for perfect timing." I lowered my gaze to my plate. Children. The word felt like another chain. How could I bring a child into a space that was already hollow? Would love grow after responsibility? Or would it simply multiply the silence? Later that night, I stood on the balcony outside our bedroom. The city lights blinked below like restless thoughts. The air smelled faintly of rain. I dialed a number I hadn't called in months. It rang twice, then 3 times. My pulse thundered in my ears. On the 4th ring, someone answered. "Hello." It wasn't him. A woman's voice. Soft. Curious. I froze. "Hello. Who is this?" The world tilted slightly. I think I dialed the wrong number," I whispered, and hung up. My fingers trembled so violently, I almost dropped the phone. A woman, of course. What did I expect? That he would remain suspended in time, frozen in the same grief as me. Armin stepped onto the balcony behind me. I hadn't heard him approach. "You okay?" he asked. I quickly wiped my face. "Yes." He didn't believe me. I could feel it. "Sometimes," he said quietly, standing beside me, "closure doesn't come in the way we imagine." My chest tightened. "You think I called him?" I said. "I don't think anything," he replied. "But I know that healing doesn't happen by pretending someone never existed." His words were calm, but they held a quiet ache of their own. "Did you ever love someone?" I asked before I could stop myself. He was silent for a moment. "Yes," he said finally. The confession settled between us like fog. "What happened?" "She chose someone else." There was no bitterness in his tone. Just fact. "Did it hurt?" I asked. He gave a small, almost amused exhale. "It still does, sometimes." I turned to look at him fully for the first time in days. Why did you agree to marry me then? Because I was tired of waiting for something that wasn't coming back, he said. And because my parents believed this would make me stable. Stable. We were two wounded people handed to each other like solutions. I don't want to use you as a distraction, I said softly. He met my eyes. And I don't want to use you as a replacement. The honesty was almost unbearable. We stood there in shared understanding. Two strangers bound by ceremony, both carrying ghosts. That night, for the first time, the silence between us felt less hostile. Not warm, but less sharp. Weeks passed. I began volunteering at a nearby school to fill my afternoons. Children had a way of demanding presence. Their laughter did not allow space for overthinking. One little girl, Ariba, clung to me constantly. She would tug at my dupatta and ask endless questions. Miss, why do adults always look sad? I smiled faintly. Do we? And she nodded seriously. My mama says grown ups think too much. Maybe that was the problem. Thinking. One afternoon, as I helped Ariba with her drawing, my phone vibrated. An unknown number. My heart misbehaved instantly. I stared at the screen. Then answered. Hello? Silence. Then, Aisha, his voice. Sad. The name didn't need to be spoken. My body recognized it before my mind could react. The classroom noise faded into a distant hum. I didn't expect you to answer, he said. My throat closed. I shouldn't have called, he added quickly. But I heard you got married. The words felt like stones. Yes, I managed. A pause stretched between us. Are you happy? He asked. The most dangerous question. Children laughed in the background. Ariba tugged my sleeve. I looked at her, at the innocence in her eyes. I'm adjusting, I said. He exhaled slowly. I'm sorry. For what? For not fighting harder. The past rushed back with brutal clarity. The promises. The arguments. The final silence. You chose your family, I said quietly. So did you? We both knew that was the truth. I'm engaged, he said suddenly. The words struck like cold water. Oh, she's good. Kind. Our families get along. Of course they do. That's good, I whispered. Another silence. I don't want to ruin your marriage, he said. I just needed to hear your voice once. A tears blurred my vision. You shouldn't call again, I said, though every part of me rebelled against the sentence. I know. But neither of us hung up immediately. Finally, he said, Goodbye, Aisha. Goodbye. The word felt final in a way our separation never had. When the call ended, I stood frozen in the middle of the classroom. Ariba looked up at me. Miss, why are you crying? I hadn't realized I was. That evening, Armin noticed my swollen eyes immediately. He called. I said before he could ask. He didn't flinch. Okay. Has engaged. A brief shadow crossed his face. Perhaps relief. Perhaps something else. And how do you feel? He asked. I searched inside myself. The pain was there. Sharp. But different. It hurts, I admitted. But it also feels finished. Armin nodded slowly. Sometimes endings don't come with drama, he said. Just acceptance. I sat on the edge of the bed. I don't know how to stop loving him overnight. You don't have to, he replied. Feelings don't obey commands. His patience unsettled me. Why are you being so understanding? I asked, almost accusingly. He looked at me steadily. Because I know what it's like to lose something you thought would be forever. For the first time, I saw not just kindness in him, but depth. That night, when we lay down, the space between us felt different. Not smaller, but softer. My hand moved slightly in the dark, almost unconsciously. It brushed against his. He stilled. I hesitated. Then, slowly, I let my fingers rest against his. He didn't grip them tightly. He didn't pull me closer. He just held my hand gently. It wasn't passion. It wasn't fire. But it was warmth. And in the quiet darkness of a marriage built without love, warmth felt like the first fragile sign of something that might one day grow. I closed my eyes. For the first time since the wedding, I did not imagine another man's voice before sleep. Instead, I listened to the steady rhythm of the one beside me. And somewhere deep inside, beneath grief and memory, a small uncertain question began to form. What if love did not always begin with intensity? What if sometimes it began with mercy? The warmth did not transform into love overnight. It settled slowly, like morning light creeping across a cold floor. After that night, something subtle shifted between us. We began talking more, not about responsibilities or schedules, but about things that had once belonged only to our private thoughts. Armin told me about the girl he had loved. Her name was Hira. They had met during his MBA. She had been ambitious, sharp, always 2 steps ahead in every discussion. He admired her confidence. She admired his calm. We planned everything, he said one evening as we sat with tea in the living room. Where we'd live, how we'd balance careers, even the names of our future kids. What happened? I asked softly. Her parents found someone more established, a businessman in Dubai. They said love doesn't pay bills. I flinched at the familiarity of that sentence. Did you try to convince her? I asked. I did. She cried. I cried. But in the end, she said, she couldn't go against her family. Silence lingered. She left 2 months before our engagement was supposed to happen. He continued. I watched her wedding pictures online. The pain in his voice was controlled but present. That must have destroyed you, I whispered. It did, he said simply. There was something profoundly intimate about sharing grief without romance. It felt honest. Stripped of performance. Do you still think about her? I asked. Sometimes, he admitted. Mostly when I wonder what version of me I would have been if things had gone differently. That question stayed with me. What version of me would exist if I had married sad? Would we have struggled financially? Fought over expectations? Watched our love erode under daily pressures? Or would we have been happy? The human heart has a dangerous habit of idealizing what it never got to test. Weeks passed. I noticed how Armin never raised his voice at home. How he listened carefully when his mother complained about minor household issues. How he checked in on his father's medications without being reminded. He was dependable, steady, and steadiness began to feel comforting. One afternoon, I found him in the study staring blankly at his laptop. "Everything okay?" I asked. He rubbed his forehead. "Just work. Deadlines." Without thinking, I placed a cup of coffee beside him. He looked up, surprised. "You didn't have to?" "I know." A small smile touched his lips. These tiny exchanges began weaving something fragile between us. Not fireworks. Not dramatic confessions. Just shared space without tension. But healing is not linear. One night, as we prepared for bed, his phone buzzed repeatedly. He glanced at the screen, then quickly turned it face down. "Who is it?" I asked. "No one important." The answer came too quickly. A strange unease curled in my stomach. "Armin," I said quietly. He hesitated, then picked up the phone. "Hira." The name flashed clearly. My chest tightened. "She messages sometimes." He admitted, "Nothing inappropriate. Just updates." "Updates," I repeated. "She's not happy," he said. "Her marriage isn't what she expected." The irony tasted bitter. "And you still talk to her?" "Occasionally." A silence fell heavy between us. I suddenly saw myself from the outside. A woman hurt by a man she once loved, now unsettled because her husband still spoke to the woman who broke his heart. "Do you still love her?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. "I don't know," he said finally. "Love doesn't vanish just because circumstances change." The words pierced. Was this how he had felt when Sad called me? A mirror of pain. "I don't want to compete with her," I said softly. "I'm not asking you to." "Then why keep her in your life?" He looked conflicted. "Maybe because letting go completely feels like admitting that it never mattered." I understood that too well. But understanding does not cancel hurt. That night, the distance between us returned. Not as wide as before, but present. In the darkness, I faced away from him again. And for the first time in weeks, I felt lonely beside my own husband. The next morning, I woke to find him sitting upright, already dressed for work. "I've been thinking," he said. I waited. "This isn't fair to you." "What isn't?" "Keeping half my heart somewhere else." The honesty startled me. "I told her we shouldn't talk anymore," he continued. "She needs to fix her own life. And I need to commit to the one I chose." My breath caught. "You chose this?" I asked quietly. "Yes." Not because he had to. Not because of family pressure, but because he decided. Something inside me shifted. I don't expect you to erase your past, he added. But I want to build something real. Even if it takes time. Real. The word felt heavier than romantic promises. After he left, I sat alone for a long time. I thought about Sad's voice. About how my heart had raced at his call. About how I had told him not to contact me again. Maybe letting go wasn't about forgetting. Maybe it was about choosing where to stand. That evening, when Armin returned, I met him at the door. I deleted his number, I said. He looked surprised. You didn't have to. I know. We stood there, inches apart. For the first time, I saw vulnerability in his eyes. Not guarded kindness, but genuine fear. What if we fail? I asked. Then at least we'll fail trying, he replied. There was no dramatic music. No cinematic rain. Just two people deciding to lean slightly toward each other instead of away. That night, when he reached for my hand, I didn't hesitate. He pulled me gently closer. Our foreheads touched. It wasn't explosive. It was tender. A cautious step forward. In the days that followed, intimacy began to grow. Not just physical, but emotional. We laughed more. We teased each other about small habits. I discovered he hated coriander. He discovered I couldn't sleep without a dim light on. Slowly, the house began to feel less like a borrowed space and more like somewhere I belonged. But life has a way of testing fragile beginnings. 2 months later, I began feeling unwell. Nausea, dizziness, fatigue. At first, I blamed stress. But when my period didn't arrive, a quiet realization dawned. I sat alone in the bathroom, staring at the pregnancy test in my trembling hand. 2 lines. Clear. Unmistakable. My breath caught. A child. Our child. Joy did not arrive immediately. Fear did. Was I ready? Was our marriage strong enough? Would this bind us or break us? When I told Armin that evening, he stared at me in stunned silence. Are you sure? He asked. I nodded. His eyes filled with something I had never seen before. Hope. He crossed the room in 2 quick steps and wrapped his arms around me. The embrace was tight, protective. I froze for a second, then slowly melted into it. We're going to be parents, he whispered, almost to himself. His voice trembled. And in that tremble, I felt something new bloom inside me. Not obligation, not duty, but a fragile thread of love. Not the kind that consumes. The kind that grows quietly in shared responsibility. That night, as I lay in bed with his hand, resting gently on my stomach, I realized something that terrified me in equal measure. This child would not be born from a passionate love story. But perhaps, just perhaps, it would be the beginning of one. Pregnancy changed the air inside the house. It was as if the walls themselves softened. Armin became attentive in ways that startled me. He researched nutrition obsessively. He downloaded apps that tracked fetal development week by week. Every Friday night, he would sit beside me and read aloud what size the baby was now. This week, he said once with quiet excitement, our baby is the size of a lemon. I laughed despite myself. Why fruit? I don't know, he grinned. Maybe babies like comparisons. His hand would rest gently on my stomach, still flat in those early weeks, as if trying to feel something that was not yet tangible. His parents were overjoyed. His mother began knitting tiny sweaters in soft pastels. His father started discussing schools, as though admissions required immediate planning. In the middle of all that anticipation, I felt suspended between two emotions: hope and fear. Some nights, I would wake up abruptly, heart racing for no clear reason. I would stare into the darkness and wonder if I deserved this new beginning. If my heart was pure enough to raise a child without shadows. One evening, during my 4th month, I found myself sitting alone in the nursery. To be. The room had been freshly painted in a pale cream shade. Sunlight filtered in gently. I placed my palm over my growing stomach. I promise, I whispered softly, I will love you without hesitation. The words felt like a vow, not just to the child, but to myself. Armin appeared at the doorway quietly. You're talking to our lemon? He teased. I smiled faintly. It's bigger than a lemon now. Yes. A mango, I think. He walked in and sat beside me on the floor. Are you scared? He asked suddenly. I hesitated. Yes. Of what? Of not being enough. His expression softened. You already are, he said. It was such a simple sentence, but it lodged deep inside me. For the first time since our wedding, I believed that perhaps I was not just filling a space. Perhaps I was building one. The months passed. My body changed. My emotions swelled unpredictably. Sometimes I cried over small things. Spilled milk, a sad advertisement, a misplaced scarf. Armin never mocked it. Once. When I broke down, because I couldn't fit into my favorite dress anymore, he knelt in front of me and said, You are carrying my entire world right now. Clothes don't matter. I laughed through tears. And in that laughter, something irreversible shifted. The night labor began. The sky was heavy with clouds. A sharp pain jolted me awake. I gasped, clutching my abdomen. Armin? I whispered urgently. He was alert instantly. Within minutes, we were in the car. Rain began falling just as we reached the hospital. The world outside blurred in streaks of silver. Hours passed in a haze of pain and effort. I gripped Armin's hand, so tightly my knuckles turned white. Don't let go. I pleaded through clenched teeth. I'm right here, he said firmly. I'm not going anywhere. And he didn't. When the baby's cry finally pierced the room, it felt like something sacred tearing open. A daughter. They placed her gently on my chest. She was small, warm, fragile. Her tiny fingers curled instinctively. I stared at her in stunned silence. Love did not arrive like lightning. It flooded quietly. Deep. Overwhelming. Armin stood beside us, his eyes shining with tears he did not bother hiding. She's perfect, he whispered. In that hospital room, with fluorescent lights and exhausted nurses, I felt something I had never felt on my wedding day. certainty. Not about the future, but about this moment. We named her Zoya. Life reorganized itself around her breathing. Sleepless nights became routine. Feedings. Diaper changes. Soft lullabies whispered in dim light. I saw a new side of Armin. Gentle, patient, almost reverent with her. He would come home from work and immediately lift Zoya into his arms, exhaustion forgotten. "Tell me about your day," he would murmur to her, as if she could respond. Watching him with her did something profound inside me. The love I felt for him did not roar. It deepened. One night, as we sat on the bed watching Zoya sleep between us, I spoke without planning to. "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung fragile in the air. He looked at me slowly, as though afraid sudden movement would shatter them. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. I nodded. "It's different," I admitted. "Not the kind I used to imagine. But steady." He reached for my hand. "I don't need fireworks," he said quietly. "I just need you." And for the first time, I kissed him without hesitation. It wasn't driven by memory. It wasn't shadowed by comparison. It was present. Real. Years might have passed like that, growing stronger in quiet devotion. But happiness is never promised permanence. Zoya was 2 when the first sign appeared. A small fever. We assumed it was seasonal. But it didn't go away. Then came the fatigue. The unusual bruising. I remember sitting in a sterile hospital office, while a doctor explained words I could barely comprehend. Blood disorder. Further testing. Concern. The room felt smaller with every sentence. Armin squeezed my hand tightly. "It's probably nothing serious," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Days later, the diagnosis arrived. Leukemia. The word detonated inside my chest. I stared at the doctor as if he were speaking another language. "This is treatable," he said carefully. "But it will require immediate intervention." Treatable. The word sounded like a fragile rope over a cliff. When we told our families, the house that had once echoed with baby laughter fell into stunned silence. Zoya, unaware of the storm gathering around her, smiled up at me from her crib. "Mama," she babbled softly. I collapsed beside her, pressing my face into her tiny hands. "Not her," I whispered to the universe. "Take anything else. Not her." Chemotherapy began. Hospitals became our second home. The bright optimism that had once filled our marriage transformed into a shared battlefield. We took turns staying overnight beside her hospital bed. We learned medical terms we never wanted to know. We memorized the sound of machines, monitoring her tiny body. One night, when she was too weak to open her eyes, I broke. "I can't do this." I sobbed in the hospital corridor. Armin pulled me into his chest. "Yes, you can," he said firmly, though his own voice shook. For her. I looked up at him. The man I had once married without love now stood as my anchor in the darkest storm. "I'm scared," I whispered. "So am I," he admitted. And in that admission, I realized something devastating. I could not imagine facing this without him. Days blurred into weeks. Zoya lost her hair. I shaved mine in solidarity. When she saw us both bald, she giggled weakly. Same, she whispered. Her strength both inspired and shattered me. One evening, after a particularly difficult treatment, the doctor requested to speak with us privately. His expression was gentle, too gentle. The treatment was not responding as hoped. They would try alternatives. But the prognosis was uncertain. The word echoed painfully. Uncertain. That night, sitting beside Zoya's fragile, sleeping form, I held Armin's hand. I don't want to lose her, I said brokenly. He pressed his forehead against mine. Neither do I. The love between us had been built slowly, carefully. Now it stood tested by something merciless. I looked at him through tears. I married you without love, I whispered. But I cannot imagine a world without you now. His grip tightened. Then don't imagine it, he said softly. But life does not always listen to desperate prayers. And as machines hummed steadily around our daughter's bed, a silent fear crept into my heart. That love, no matter how strong it grows, cannot always protect what matters most. The night the monitors began to sound different, I felt it before anyone said a word. There is a certain silence that falls before loss. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply settles into the air, like a warning no one wants to understand. Zoya had been weaker all day. Her small fingers no longer wrapped around mine, with the same strength. Her eyelids fluttered, as if even opening them required effort. Armin stood by the window of the hospital room, staring out at nothing. I knew that posture now. It was how he held himself when he was trying not to fall apart. I sat beside her bed and brushed my fingers gently over her forehead. Mama's here, I whispered. Her lips curved slightly. Mama, she breathed. That single word was both a blessing and a wound. The doctors moved more quickly that evening. Nurses adjusted machines. A quiet urgency filled the room. I looked at Armin. He looked at me. No words were needed. We both understood. When the doctor approached us, his expression confirmed what our hearts already feared. We're doing everything we can, he said carefully. Everything? Such a heavy word for something that might not be enough. I leaned down close to Zoya's face. My brave girl, I murmured. You don't have to be strong anymore. A tear slipped onto her pillow. Armin stood beside me and placed his hand over both of ours. We love you, he whispered, voice breaking completely. The machines continued their steady rhythm. Then, slowly, almost gently, the rhythm changed. I remember the exact sound of that flat tone. It cut through the room like glass. Someone turned it off. The silence that followed was unbearable. No cry. No dramatic collapse. Just stillness. My body refused to process it. I shook her lightly. Zoya, I whispered. Baby. Nothing. The nurse placed a hand on my shoulder. I don't remember screaming. But my throat hurt later, so I must have. Armin wrapped his arms around me as my knees gave out. She's gone? He said hoarsely, as if saying it aloud might somehow make it less unreal. Gone. The word felt too small for what had just been taken from us. The hospital allowed us time alone with her. I held her in my arms one last time. She felt lighter. Too light. I'm sorry. I kept whispering. I'm so sorry. For what? I didn't even know. For not protecting her. For not loving her enough to keep her alive. For every moment I had ever complained about exhaustion. Armin sat beside me, tears falling freely down his face. He did not try to hide them. He did not try to be strong. We were both broken. When we finally left the hospital without her, the world outside looked offensively normal. Cars moved. People laughed. The sun still existed. How dare it? The house we returned to felt like a museum of a life that no longer breathed. Her toys were still scattered in the living room. A small pink shoe lay near the sofa. Her crib stood untouched. I walked into her room slowly. The walls were still pale cream. The curtains still filtered light gently. Everything was exactly the same, except her. I sank onto the floor and pressed my back against the wall. She was just here, I whispered. Armin stood in the doorway, unable to step fully inside. For days, we moved through the house like ghosts. Condolence visitors came and went. Plates of food we could not eat filled the kitchen. People said the usual things. She's in a better place. God tests those he loves. You're young. You can have another. Another. As if children were replaceable objects. After the last visitor left one evening, the silence returned heavier than ever. I sat on the bed staring at nothing. I don't think I can survive this, I said quietly. Armin sat beside me. We will, he replied, though his voice lacked certainty. How? I demanded. How do parents survive burying their child? He had no answer. Weeks passed. Grief is not dramatic every day. Sometimes it is just exhaustion. Sometimes it is anger at the smallest inconvenience. Sometimes it is sitting in your child's empty room and forgetting to breathe. One night, I found Armin sitting alone in the dark living room. He was holding Zoya's small sweater. I should have done more, he said, without looking at me. You did everything, I replied. It wasn't enough. His voice cracked in a way I had never heard before. I knelt in front of him. Listen to me, I said firmly through tears. This was not your failure. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. I can't lose you too, he whispered. The fear in his eyes mirrored my own. Somewhere in the middle of that devastation, I realized something profound. We had started this marriage without love. We had built it slowly, carefully. We had survived ghosts of past relationships. We had learned each other's wounds. We had created life together. And now, we were standing in the ashes together. I'm not going anywhere, I said. And I meant it. Grief did not leave us. It became part of us. But slowly, we began speaking her name without collapsing. We began sharing memories and smiling faintly instead of breaking completely. She used to say, "Same, same." Armin said once, and for the first time, we both laughed gently. Months later, I found out I was pregnant again. The news did not bring immediate joy. It brought terror. I sat with the test in my hand, shaking. When I told Armin, he went pale. "We don't have to," he began. "I want to," I interrupted softly. "But I'm scared." "So am I," he admitted. This pregnancy was different. Every doctor visit felt like walking on fragile glass. Every ultrasound was a held breath. When our son was born healthy months later, I cried in a way that felt both relieved and guilty. Holding him, I felt joy, but also the sharp absence of the child, who should have been there to meet her brother. We named him Amen. Peace. Because that is what we needed. Years passed. Grief softened at the edges but never vanished. There are still nights when I wake up and expect to hear Zoya's small footsteps. There are still birthdays that hurt like fresh wounds. But there is also laughter in our home again. Ammon runs through the same living room where his sister once played. Armin and I sit together some evenings after he sleeps, hands intertwined, not out of obligation but out of choice. One night, years after that bright wedding hall, where I felt nothing but emptiness, I turned to Armin and said, "Do you ever regret marrying me?" He smiled softly. "No. Even though we didn't love each other then." He shook his head. "We learned," he said. "And what we built survived the worst." I rested my head on his shoulder. "I married without love," I whispered. "But you didn't stay without it," he replied, and he was right. Love did not arrive for us in grand declarations or reckless passion. It arrived in mercy, in patience, in hospital corridors and sleepless nights, in shared grief, in choosing each other again and again when walking away might have been easier. If someone had asked me on my wedding day whether I believed in arranged love, I would have said no. But now, after loss and rebuilding, after burying a child and holding another, after watching the man beside me break and heal with me, I understand something I didn't then. Love is not always the fire that begins a story. Sometimes, it is the quiet flame that refuses to die when everything else turns to ash. And in the silence of our bedroom, years later, with our son breathing softly down the hall, and memories of our daughter woven into the walls, I finally feel what I once thought I had lost forever. Not the love of a boy under a gulmohar tree, but the love of a man who stood beside me when the world ended. And stayed. I married without love, but I lived long enough to grow it.